My father's name was George Thomas Quickenden. Well, my father was born in May 1898 in London, and I think it was either Islington or Clerkenwell. My grandfather was a port shipper. A drayman. He delivered the port for port shippers. That's what his job was. And my grandma, they were a poor family. My grandma used to go cleaning to make extra money. So it was a poor family for Dad and his one sister, but a happy one. I've got his one of his school reports, and I've got all his school medals, so obviously he did quite well at school. And he went to Sir Hugh Middleton School, which was bombed in the First World War, the Second World War. So I don't think it exists as Sir Hugh Middleton School now, but as some other college. Well, strangely enough, it was on the site of Clerkenwell Prison. So on Dad's school report, there's the prison, and then the school, and the cells, and then the classrooms. And I'm sure the boys and girls thought of it as a prison as well. Well, he was very, very interested in clockwork and anything mechanical. So he was apprenticed to a watchmaker. And as soon as he was 18, he joined up. And because of his trade and his delicate hands and use of machinery, he went into the Navy, but the Royal Naval Air Service, and they used him purely to look after the machinery and the instruments and everything like that. So he never went overseas because the airship stations were in England. The only thing he ever said was he was responsible for the time signal, and I always thought the time signal came from Greenwich, but he said it used to come from Paris, and it was a room full of instruments that he had to merely get the correct time signal. So the difference between then and now is inconceivable, really. Everything was in its infancy, so it was a bit hit and miss with everything, I imagine, but he was very meticulous in his job, and being a watchmaker, of course you had to be, but that obviously came out in his early days when he was in the Royal Naval Air Service. He was in the Royal Naval Air Service for just 2 years. He became of age to join up, and that was 1916, and of course the war ended 1918, so he did the 2 years service. I don't know where Mum and Dad met, but they'd obviously been good friends, because my mother lost her family when she was quite young, and she was living with her only sister. And then that sister decided to live with a friend, which left Mum more or less homeless. So Dad stepped in and said, well, let's get married and set up home together. I remember Mum telling me that, but I don't know any more about their early days together, but they obviously knew one another well enough to contemplate marriage. We've always lived round Islington Way in London, so I presume they set up their first home in Islington. I wasn't around at the time. Why he was in the Royal Naval Air Service, I would think he always had a interest in what was modern technology in those days. And I should think he was interested in the airships because they were new-ish coming up then. So I think that's why he would want to go in the Royal Naval Air Service, because there was no RAF, of course, or Fleet Air Arm or anything like that. So it was the Navy. His training, well, he joined up at Holborn, and they were sent to the Crystal Palace, of all places, and he always told me that they slung their hammocks, because they, naturally being Navy, slept in hammocks, and they slung their hammocks on the girders of the Crystal Palace. And he always said hammocks were very comfortable to sleep in. And of course they roll up to nothing, so that was very handy. But being Navy, once again, it was hammocks. He was sent to Kingsnorth Station. That's really where he was, which was the big naval air base on the banks of the Thames in Kent. And occasionally came over when they needed extra crew over to Willingdon in East Sussex, little knowing that years afterwards he would be living in Polegate, which was a stone's throw from where he was sent occasionally. But mainly he was in Kingsnorth. I just get the impression that they were all good pals and, good comrades together. But I've no idea of his daily work. Well, I think they were short of crew, and knowing that they had missions to accomplish from Willingdon, they sent out for extra hands, because when the airships came in, the pilot just threw ropes out from what Dad always called the basket, but I understand it's the gondola. Just threw ropes out, and anybody on the ground grabbed one and looked for the nearest ring embedded in concrete to tie it up to. And Dad was very unfortunate one time. It must have been a gust of wind, and he was hit on the nose and broke his nose with the airship. I mean, it could have been a lot worse than that, but an airship broke his nose. That was his war wound. After the war, everybody got the 3 medals just for serving, which were called Pipsqueak and Wilfrid. And they were, Pipsqueak and Wilfrid were cartoon characters in a comic, which is where the name comes from. So, yes, Dad received the ordinary one, but he didn't do anything especially to get any other medals. Well, before I say any more, I must say that during Dad's service, it changed to the RAF. And Dad was in naval uniform because they were Navy. When it became the RAF, they changed to the RAF uniform, but in those days it wasn't blue, it was khaki. So Dad had a set of khaki uniform and a Royal Navy uniform. And according to which MPs were on at the railway station, they dressed in the other uniform to go into London if they were skipping off for anything. So it was quite handy, really. Yes. What did he do after the war? Well, he was apprenticed before he joined up to be a watchmaker, and he had to go back and complete his apprenticeship. And all his life he's mended watches and clocks. Right until, I suppose, in his 90s. So he must have mended quite a few in his time. Of course, we never had one at home that went.
Do you think there would have been anything from his career in the Royal Naval Air Service that he might have used in his civilian life after the war?
I don't think so, not anything material, but friends he would have kept, because he used to go to reunion dinners, and dear brother Gasbag, the letters used to come. I was always amused to see those coming. And so he had friends, but nothing material from the war, only friendship. We were always a poor family, but we were rich in friends. Mum and Dad had, I was going to say a boy child, yes they did. They had what would have been my older brother, who died of whooping cough at 6 weeks old. And then I came along in 1927, and they stopped at that. I was obviously quite enough for them. And we lived in Islington, and Dad saved up and managed to buy a house in Islington, which was not a lot of money in those days, but comparatively it was a struggle for him. But that's their aim in life, to have their own place. And we used to go on a holiday with my two cousins, and we always went to Hastings because they knew some of the fisher folk in Hastings. And one time when I must have been about 4, judging by the size of me, an air circus came. I think it must have been at the back of Hastings, obviously on the level ground at the back there, and this flying circus came, and it was Alan Cobham's flying circus, and Dad and I took advantage of the offer of flights. Mum wouldn't go, she wanted her feet on the ground, but Dad and I went up, and I've got pictures of the plane, which looks very, very primitive. And I can remember very clearly, although I was small, sitting in the plane, one either side, one row of people either side, with what I remember as cables running down the middle. And I think for the pilot to alter the direction, he would pull on one cable and the other, which must have altered the rudder at the back. It makes it sound very primitive. But anyway, I survived to tell the tale. And I can remember looking out once and seeing the sea going down vertically and the sky going down vertically instead of horizontally. So I can have that memory. Not at all scared, I just took it all in my stride. But I've got the pictures to prove it. And that was my first flight. My second flight was British Caledonian over to Canada, so slightly different then. I was 72 at the time, so aviation had changed somewhat. Well, we lived in Islington until Dad reached, now I was 7 when we moved, so that would be 1934. And we moved out to Palmer's Green, which was a marvellous move. It was North London and very leafy and very nice. And we lived there for a long while with Dad working up in the city, and then doing as much work as he could at home, saving up once again. And then when he reached retirement, he'd always promised Mum that they would move to Hastings because that was the place they'd always been to. But at that age, Hastings became very run down, and when we started looking, we decided Eastbourne was the place to be. We wanted a bungalow, and Eastbourne didn't seem to have bungalows, so we came inland a bit and found Polegate. And Dad and Mum and I all up sticks and moved to Polegate, where I still am. Moving so close to Willingdon, it's only a stone's throw down to Polegate, I don't think he realised at the time, and it wasn't until I started meeting people and talking to people that we suddenly realised that yes, that was the place that he'd come to all those years ago, and we looked around but he couldn't remember anything of it. But of course Willingdon has changed so much. There must be places that were there in his time, but I suppose he came by lorry and just went on to the station and was taken back by lorry, so I don't think he had a chance to explore around anything. We all lived together quite happily, Mum, Dad and I. We were all very happy, united family, interested in one another. Dad still did a bit of watch watchmaking, because everybody has a watch that or a clock that doesn't work, so he was quite happily engaged. Mum died 10 years after we moved here, with me looking after her, and then I carried on naturally. I went to work myself, but gave up when I reached retirement age, and Dad and I lived together quite happily, and he died after his 100th birthday. He didn't quite make 101, but he died just after his 100th birthday. I would have loved him to have lived. That was in 1999. I would love him to have lived just a little bit longer, because then he would have been alive in 3 centuries. He went from gaslight to a man walking on the moon all in one lifetime. So that was amazing. Used to have the lamplighter come around the streets, lighting it and putting it out. He was a shy man, but he was, all my friends called him Dad, and he was what I would call a gentleman, which I don't think you get too much of these days. But yes, everybody liked my dad. And when he became 100, we used to, he used to go for a day release at what was then All Saints Hospital to give me a day's break. And they put on a party like This Is Your Life for him with a cake, and I was the surprise visitor. He had one cake then, he had the family all came down, and we had a family lunch, and he had another cake then. All the neighbours came in the evening. I was exhausted, but Dad wasn't, he was fine. Having said he didn't want any fuss for his birthday, it would have been very upset if we hadn't have made a fuss of him. And then also I used to help run the disabled club up at the community centre in Polegate, and so he had another cake up there. So yes, he did very nicely. But after all that, gradually various things started going wrong with him, and he had to have various treatments and things, and it was obvious his body was wearing out. And I nursed him right to the last week, and then he was in a coma, and they took him into the Eastbourne District General Hospital, and he passed away there. Well, I didn't go on holiday while Dad was alive, but having a school friend who emigrated to Toronto in Canada, she'd always said to me, as soon as you're free, come out and stay with me. So I did just that. I got a passport, and we arranged a holiday. And so from flying when I was 4, my next flight was when I was 72. So it was a slightly different aeroplane. It was British Caledonian. And I said to the stewardess, this is my first flight for 60 odd years. And, would you tell me what I did? And she looked after me. She was great. And we stopped at Montreal before we got to Toronto. And a lot of people got out. And so then after we were up again, she said to me, the boys want to meet you. So I looked around for the boys, but it turned out to be the cabin crew. The pilot, not the cabin crew. And off I went to the cockpit, and she said this is this lady's first flight for so many years, and they asked me about it. And when they knew that my father was in the Royal Naval Air Service, they were very interested in all that, because they thought the RAF was a service right from the beginning. They didn't realise that the Navy had an air service before ever the RAF was thought of. Dad always kept various photographs of the his friends and the group he worked with at Kingsnorth. So unfortunately, I haven't any pictures of Willingdon, but I've got pictures of various pictures of the company at Kingsnorth, and a photograph of Dad in naval uniform, and then what became the RAF uniform, but as I said was khaki. And I have still his ditty box, which he always treasured, and that was given to everybody when they enlisted, to keep all their valuables in, and it had a lock and a key, so everything was safe. It's quite a well-made box, and it's very heavy if they had to carry it around, but of course it was safe from harm. That is all really. I have one medal from him, one of the Pipsqueak and Wilfrid. I don't know which of those three it is, but just the one. And various papers, his discharge papers and various papers of his that he treasured, so I also treasure them.